After everything I had given them, my own children decided there was no room for me in their lives. The one I had sacrificed the most for, my own son, offered me nothing more than his garage. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Follow my story to the end, and you'll see just how far a person can be pushed, and how they can find the strength to push back. The old grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my late wife's parents, chimed 3 o'clock. The deep, familiar tones echoed the hollowness in my chest as I looked at the faces of my children seated around my dining table. It was my table, in my house, the very home where I had raised them, where I'd bandaged their scraped knees, celebrated their graduations, and held them close through their first heartbreaks. "Dad, you have to be realistic," Charles said, his voice holding that cool, professional tone he used when delivering difficult news to patients. My son, the esteemed surgeon, the one for whom I had sacrificed the most. Realistic? My voice was barely a whisper, trembling with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. "You've just finished dividing your mother's inheritance among the 3 of you without so much as a word to me. And now, you're standing in my home telling me I need to sell it." Michelle, my eldest daughter, refused to meet my gaze, staring intently at a spot on the tablecloth. "Mom's will was specific, Dad. The assets were to be split between her children. And what about me?" The question felt heavy, hanging in the suddenly silent room. Her husband of 42 years? No one had an answer. The silence was their reply. "We've already talked it over," Charles continued, his manicured fingernails tapping a restless rhythm against his porcelain coffee cup. "You can come stay with us." For a fleeting moment, a foolish spark of hope ignited within me. Perhaps they do care after all. "In the garage," he added, his tone flat and final. "We've had it converted. It has its own small bathroom. It's the best we can offer. We just don't have the space for you in our lives right now, Dad." The garage. I was being relegated to the garage, like some old lawnmower they couldn't quite bring themselves to throw away but didn't want cluttering up the house. "Charles," I whispered, the name catching in my throat. "I paid for your medical school. I worked 2 jobs for years, all while taking care of your mother. And I'm grateful," he cut in, his tone conveying the exact opposite of gratitude. "That's precisely why I'm offering you a place. Michelle and Danielle aren't even doing that much." My daughters shifted uncomfortably in their chairs but offered no defense. Danielle, my youngest, was completely absorbed by her phone, as if this whole conversation was a minor inconvenience. When did they become so callous? Michelle finally cleared her throat. "The housing market is strong right now, Dad. You'll get a great price for the house." "This is my home," I said, my voice finally breaking. "Your mother and I built this life together. We planted that oak tree in the front yard the year you were born." "It's just a house, Dad," Charles sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "You're getting emotional. Just a house." These walls had absorbed the laughter, tears, and memories of our entire family history. To them, it was just brick and mortar. "You have 3 weeks to make a decision," Michelle announced, pushing her chair back and rising from the table. "If you don't want to sell, you'll have to find a way to buy out our shares. Otherwise, we've already spoken to a real estate agent." They had already consulted a realtor about my home without even telling me. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. As they collected their coats and purses, a terrifying realization washed over me. I was 65 years old, with dwindling savings and absolutely nowhere to go. My wife's pension had ceased upon her death, and the modest pension I received from my years as a teacher barely covered the cost of groceries and utilities. "I'll text you the contact information for a moving company," Charles called over his shoulder as he walked out. "They're very efficient with seniors." The front door clicked shut behind them, and in an instant, the home I had cherished for 4 decades felt alien and hostile, as if it too was preparing to cast me out. I walked slowly over to the mantelpiece and picked up a framed photograph from our last family vacation. We were all smiling, radiating a genuine happiness. When had it all soured? When had I become a burden to be stored in a garage? That night, I lay awake in the bed I had shared with my beloved Helen, staring up at the familiar shadows on the ceiling. What am I supposed to do now? I whispered into the emptiness beside me, an emptiness that had been my constant companion for nearly a year. The silence that answered was profound and deafening. 3 days later, I was standing in Charles's converted garage. A thin, industrial-grade carpet barely covered the cold concrete floor. A cheap folding screen offered a flimsy illusion of privacy, separating the tiny toilet and shower stall from a narrow twin bed that looked like it had been salvaged from a college dorm room. A small, wobbly desk was meant to serve as both a dining table and a place to write. The cinder-block walls were painted a stark, sterile white, a color that only amplified the cold, impersonal nature of the space. "It's the best we can do," Charles said, his arms crossed over his chest in a defensive posture. "We're using the spare bedroom as Jessica's home office now, and the kids need their own space." I could only nod, a lump forming in my throat that made speech impossible. This garage, this afterthought, was the reward for a lifetime of devotion. "You should be grateful," Charles added, glancing at his expensive watch. "Some elderly parents end up in truly awful nursing homes." Elderly? When had I become elderly in my own son's eyes? When did I transform from dad into a liability? After he left, I sat on the edge of the flimsy mattress, my packed suitcases standing at my feet like silent accusers. Through the small, high window, I could see into the main house. Charles was already on his phone, laughing about something, as if he hadn't just confined his own father to a concrete cell. This wasn't how my life was supposed to turn out. After a lifetime of giving everything I had, I was left with nothing, not even a small space in my own children's hearts. The first night in Charles's garage was sleepless. The unfamiliar noises, the constant hum of the water heater, the sound of cars passing on the street kept me wide awake. Or perhaps it was the immense weight on my chest, the sheer disbelief that my new reality was not some terrible nightmare. As I lay on that narrow bed, my mind drifted back through the years, flipping through a mental photo album where every picture showed my hands tirelessly serving others. I remembered Helen's diagnosis 15 years ago, Parkinson's. The neurologist had delivered the news with such clinical detachment, as if he were discussing a weather forecast instead of the gradual, cruel deterioration of my wife's body. "You'll need professional help," he had advised, but we couldn't afford it, not with 3 children still needing help with college expenses. So, my hands learned new skills. They learned to administer medications with a steady touch, to bathe my wife with dignity, to massage her cramping muscles in the dead of night. They picked up a needle and thread, and I started taking in tailoring and alteration jobs that I could do from home, while Helen dozed in her armchair. I remember the endless mountains of mending, the formal dresses I altered, the curtains I hemmed, all to keep our family financially stable as the medical bills piled up. My fingers were often raw, pricked by the needle countless times, but I never stopped. What other choice did I have? Charles had been in medical school back then. The irony of it all is not lost on me now. I was working myself to the point of utter exhaustion so my son could learn how to heal others. Yet he apparently never learned the simple lesson of how to care for his own father. I got up and walked over to the small window, peering out into the dark yard. A light was still on in Charles's kitchen. Was he up late, studying medical journals as he often claimed, or was he simply enjoying the comfort of the spacious home he had while I was trapped in this concrete box? I remembered the summer of Charles's residency. He'd called me in tears, completely overwhelmed by the crushing demands of his program. "I can't do this, Dad," he'd sobbed into the phone. "It's just too much." Even though Helen needed me at home, I packed a bag and drove 3 hours to stay with him for 3 weeks. I cooked his meals, cleaned his apartment, and listened for hours as he processed the trauma of losing his first patient. My hands had wiped away his tears then, just as they had when he was a little boy terrified of thunderstorms. When his twins were born a few years later, I was there again. Jessica, his wife, was busy launching her new law practice and worked grueling 16-hour days. I moved in with them for 6 months, rocking colicky babies through sleepless nights, changing diapers, and sterilizing bottles until my hands were chapped and sore. My own sleep was reduced to short, fragmented naps between their cries. Charles had kissed my cheek when I finally prepared to go back home. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Dad," he had said. "You're a lifesaver." Where was that son now? When had his gratitude hardened into this cold, dismissive indifference? I opened my suitcase, still not unpacked, and pulled out an old, leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth from years of use. Helen had given it to me on our 20th anniversary. "Write down your dreams, Arthur," she had said. "Not just our dreams, but your dreams." But the pages held very little about my own aspirations. Instead, they were filled with chronicles of our family's daily struggles and small triumphs. The time Michelle won the state science fair, Danielle's soccer team winning the championship, and the day Charles's medical school acceptance letter arrived. I flipped to an entry from nearly 30 years ago, April 15th, 1994. "The university called today. They're holding a spot for me in the master's program for history next fall. After all these years, I might finally finish my education. Helen says we'll find a way to make it work financially. Charles's cello lessons are expensive, but he's so gifted. I couldn't possibly ask him to give them up. Maybe I can pick up more tailoring jobs on the weekends." I never did go back for that master's degree. The cello lessons turned into competitions, which led to prestigious summer music camps, which in turn became a highlight on the college applications that showcased his musical talents alongside his academic achievements. I closed the journal, my chest tightening with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't exactly regret, nor was it resentment. It was something in between. Something that tasted of a lifetime of sacrifices that had gone completely unacknowledged. The next morning, Charles knocked sharply on the garage door at precisely 7 a.m. "Dad, we need to go over some house rules," he said, without any preamble or even asking how I had slept. "We can't have you coming and going at all hours of the night. It disturbs the twins." "House rules?" As if I were a renter, not his own father. I nodded silently, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. The same eyes that had once looked up at me with such complete trust and adoration. "And we'll need you to contribute to the grocery bill, of course," he continued. "Just because you're living here doesn't mean it's a free ride." My hands, the very hands that had fed him, clothed him, and nursed him back to health so many times, clenched into fists at my sides. But I kept my voice even. "Of course," I said, my mind racing as I tried to figure out how I would manage on my small pension. As Charles rattled off a list of more rules, I glanced down at my hands. They were older now, spotted with age, the knuckles slightly swollen from decades of hard work. These hands had served my family faithfully for my entire adult life, and now they were empty. 2 weeks in Charles's garage crawled by, each day bringing a new and inventive humiliation. The concrete walls seemed to press in on me, making the small space feel even tighter as I tried to adjust to this new bleak reality, a reality where I was seen not as family, but as an imposition. The inadequacies of the garage became more glaring with each passing day. During heavy rainstorms, water would seep in under the ill-fitting door, soaking the thin carpet and leaving a damp, musty smell in the air. The small space heater Charles had grudgingly given me did little to combat the morning chill. At night, I could hear the faint scratching of mice in the corners, my uninvited roommates in this concrete box. "We need to discuss bathroom schedules," Charles announced one morning, barging in without even the courtesy of a knock. I was still in my nightgown, a fact that he either didn't notice or didn't care about. "Bathroom schedules?" I repeated, pulling my robe more tightly around myself. "You can't use the main house bathroom between 6:30 and 8, 30 inches the morning. That's our family time," he stated, emphasizing the word family, as if to remind me I was no longer a member of that club. "And preferably not between 7 and 9 p.m. either. The kids need their space." I glanced over at the tiny shower stall, crammed into the corner of the garage. The water pressure was so pitifully weak that it took 10 minutes just to rinse the shampoo out of my hair, and the hot water never lasted for more than 3 minutes. "Charles, the shower in here barely—" "Dad," he interrupted sharply, "you need to realize that we are making significant sacrifices to accommodate you. Jessica is already irritated enough as it is." My heart sank. So, his wife didn't want me here. Charles sighed with impatience. "Nobody plans on having their father-in-law living in their garage, do they? We had other plans for this space." His words stung more than I wanted to admit. I had become an obstacle, a wrench thrown into the gears of their perfectly curated lives. Later that day, I ventured into the main house to make myself a cup of tea. The twins, Ethan and Emily, were sprawled on the living room couch, completely absorbed in a video game. At 13, they had entered the phase where any sign of grandfatherly affection was met with a dramatic eye roll. "Hi, kids," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. Ethan barely looked up from his screen. "Mom said we're not supposed to let you use the TV. I just came in for some tea," I stammered, feeling my face flush. Emily snickered. "Grandpa, your stuff is in the garage, remember? Mom says you shouldn't be in here when she's not home." I stood there, frozen, the empty mug hanging limply from my fingers. My own grandchildren had been enlisted to police my movements. I had become a trespasser in my son's house. Back in the garage, I noticed that my few personal items had been moved around. The framed photo of Helen and me that I kept on the nightstand was now lying face down. My hands trembled with a mixture of grief and fury as I set it upright. That weekend, Charles and Jessica hosted a dinner party. I wasn't invited, of course, but the sound of laughter and lively conversation easily passed through the thin walls. I could distinguish Michelle's voice, and Danielle's too. My own children were gathered just 30 feet away from me, and I was not welcome to join them. When the doorbell rang again, I peered through my small window. It was Henry, my closest friend for over 30 years. Charles greeted him warmly at the door, ushering him inside. Henry knew I was living here. Why hadn't he come to the garage to say hello? 2 hours later, as the guests were leaving, Henry glanced towards the garage. Our eyes met for a brief moment through the window. He quickly looked away, turning to follow Charles back into the house. It seemed even my friends were choosing sides. Later, I heard a soft knock. Charles stood there, his arms folded. "Dad, I need you to help clean up. The housekeeper isn't coming until Tuesday." Not, "Would you like to join us for a drink?" Not, "Sorry we couldn't include you." Just another demand. As I scraped leftover food from expensive plates and loaded their dishwasher, Charles and Jessica stood nearby, discussing their upcoming vacation to the Bahamas, never once acknowledging that the man washing their dishes was the same man they had deliberately excluded from their party. I noticed the beautiful silver serving platter I had received as a wedding gift among the stacks of dirty dishes. Charles had taken it from my house without asking. "That was your grandmother's," I said quietly. Charles barely glanced at it. "Yes, and now it's mine. Mom wanted us to have the family heirlooms." "I don't recall her saying that," I replied, my voice surprisingly firm. Jessica cut in, her tone dripping with condescension. "Arthur, we've been over this. The inheritance was clearly defined." I said nothing more as I continued to clean. What was the point? The next morning, I found an itemized bill slipped under my door. "Monthly contribution" was written at the top in Charles's precise clinical handwriting. Rent, $400. Utilities, $150. Food, $300. Wi-Fi, $50. Total, $900. My entire monthly pension was only $1,200. I sat down heavily on the bed, the piece of paper trembling in my hands. This wasn't living with family. This was exploitation disguised as charity. That afternoon, as I was folding my laundry in the corner of the garage I had designated as my kitchenette, I overheard Charles talking on the phone through the open window. "It's just exhausting having Dad here," he was saying. "He expects to be treated like some kind of honored guest, but honestly, he should just be grateful we didn't put him in a home." There was a pause. "Well, if he complains about the bill, I'll just have to remind him how much we spent on Mom's medical care over the years. It's about time he started carrying his own weight." I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle a sob. After everything I had sacrificed, after the years I spent as Helen's primary caregiver, after emptying my own retirement savings to help Charles with the down payment on this very house, this was how he saw me. A burden, a parasite. That night, sleep was impossible. The raw, painful truth had finally settled over me like a funeral shroud. I had no home anymore, no place in the world where I truly belonged. In the profound silence of the garage, surrounded by the tattered remnants of my life, I finally allowed myself to weep. The evening air was unseasonably chilly for May. As I walked the 3 blocks back to Charles's house from the bus stop, I pulled my thin jacket tighter. My part-time job at the local library barely paid enough to cover the contribution Charles demanded, but it gave me a place to go during the day, a place where I was treated with a measure of basic human dignity. The rich smell of pot roast, Helen's favorite, greeted me as I approached the house. Through the large dining room window, I could see them all gathered around the table. Charles, Jessica, the twins, and Michelle's family. Danielle was there too, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone, as usual. A family dinner to which I had not been invited. I slipped quietly into the cold garage, my appetite completely gone. They wouldn't miss my presence. They never did. "Grandpa?" A small voice startled me. Emily stood in the doorway, holding a plate of food. "I thought you might be hungry," she mumbled, avoiding my eyes. My heart swelled with a sudden warmth. Perhaps not all connection was lost. "Thank you, sweetheart. Would you like to sit with me for a minute while I eat?" She glanced nervously back towards the house. "Dad said I shouldn't stay out here for too long. He says you get difficult when you get too much attention." The warmth in my chest instantly turned to ice. "I see. Well, thank you for the food." After she left, I picked at the meal, noticing they hadn't given me any of the apple cobbler I could smell baking earlier. Even in this small gesture of supposed kindness, I was an afterthought. I was washing my plate in the small utility sink when I heard raised voices coming from the house. My curiosity piqued. I moved closer to the door. "Can't keep doing this," Michelle was saying. "It's just not sustainable." "What do you suggest?" It was Charles's voice, sharp and frustrated. "You and Danielle aren't exactly stepping up to the plate. We could sell the lake cabin," Danielle suggested. "Use that money for his care. That's our inheritance." Jessica cut in. "Why should we have to spend it on your father?" My stomach plummeted. They were talking about me as if I were a leaking faucet that needed fixing, a financial problem to be solved. "The garage situation is temporary," Charles said. "I'm looking into other options." "Assisted living facilities cost a fortune," Michelle replied. "Unless we can find somewhere really basic, no frills." "He doesn't need anything fancy," Charles agreed. "Just a place with medical supervision. He's getting forgetful." I pressed my hand against my mouth, stifling a gasp. Forgetful. I had forgotten to pay Charles's ridiculous bill on the exact day he demanded it one time. Once. "What about all his stuff?" Danielle asked. "The things still in storage from the house." "Sell it," Charles said flatly. "Most of it is junk anyway. We can use the money for the facility's deposit." I backed away from the door, my legs suddenly feeling weak and unsteady. They were planning to institutionalize me, to sell my most cherished possessions. Helen's books, our wedding china, the antique writing desk where I had penned 1,000 love notes to my wife over the years. All of it was to be liquidated without my knowledge or consent. I sank onto my bed, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. And yet, the evidence was all around me. The garage that was never meant to be a home, the monthly bill that consumed my pension, the way they spoke about me instead of to me. I was being methodically erased. A soft knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. Michelle stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Dad, we didn't realize you were back," she said, her eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "Clearly," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "We were just discussing some family matters." "Yes, I heard. Selling my belongings to pay for my stay in some bargain basement nursing home." Michelle's face flushed a deep red. "You were eavesdropping. It's hard not to overhear things through these paper-thin walls, especially when you're discussing how to dispose of me." "Dad, it's not like that. We're just trying to figure out what's best for everyone." "Everyone except me, it seems." She sighed, running a hand through her hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Helen, it made my heart ache. "You're being dramatic. We're trying to help you. By selling my possessions without asking? By making decisions about my life without including me in the conversation? You're not thinking clearly," she said, her tone laced with condescension. "You're just being emotional." Those words, so dismissive, so belittling, ignited a fire in me that had long been dormant. I stood up, straightening my shoulders. "I am emotional, Michelle. I'm your father. I carried you on my shoulders. I raised you for 18 years, and I have loved you for 42. If that doesn't earn me the right to my own emotions, then what does? See, this is exactly why we need to..." "Need to what? Lock me away? Pretend I don't exist?" "I am still here, Michelle. I am still the man who taught you how to ride a bike, who stayed up all night with you when you had the chicken pox, who co-signed the loan for your first car." Her expression hardened. "That was a long time ago." "Not to me," I whispered. "To me, it feels like yesterday." After Michelle left, I sat motionless on the edge of my bed, watching the long shadows stretch across the cold concrete floor. The finality of my situation settled over me like a fine layer of dust. My children saw me as a problem to be solved, not a person to be loved. I was completely and utterly alone. Later that night, long after the family dinner had ended, I heard the garage door creak open. Charles appeared, his silhouette framed against the dim light from the house. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice as clinical and detached as ever. "About your future arrangements." I looked at my son, my handsome, accomplished son, who had once crawled into my lap for comfort during thunderstorms, and I saw only a stranger. "I know about your plans," I said quietly. "I heard everything." Charles's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Then you understand why we need to make some changes. This situation isn't working for anyone." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. We've found a place," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "It's not luxurious, but it's clean. They have activities, medical staff on site." "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop, Charles." He blinked, unaccustomed to being challenged. "I am not going to a facility. I am not selling my possessions. And I am not going to be treated like a burden by my own children for one more day." "Don't be ridiculous, Dad. Where will you go? What will you do? You can't afford that," I said, surprising myself with the calm authority in my voice. "Is no longer your concern. You've all made it perfectly clear that I am not a part of this family anymore. So be it." Charles's expression flickered between irritation and uncertainty. "You're being childish. You need us." Those 3 words crystallized everything. You need us. Not, we love you. Not, we want to help you. It was a statement of power, a declaration of control. "No," I said softly. "I don't think I do." Charles left without another word, clearly assuming that I would have come to my senses by morning. But as I sat in the stillness of my garage prison, watching the moonlight filter through the small, grimy window, something inside me shifted. I was Arthur Anderson. I had raised 3 children, supported my wife through 15 years of a debilitating illness, and built a life from scratch. I possessed a strength I had long forgotten was there. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Dennis, it's Arthur. I'm sorry to call so late. Yes, I'm all right. Actually, no, I'm not all right at all. I need your help." Dawn was just beginning to streak the sky with pale shades of pink and gray as I slipped out of Charles's garage, a single suitcase in my hand. After my late-night call to Dennis, I had spent hours carefully choosing the few items I would take with me. My wedding photograph, Helen's favorite poetry book, and a small box of faded birthday cards my children had made for me when their love was still pure and unconditional. I had left a note on the small desk. "I have made other arrangements. Don't worry about me." It was short and simple. They probably wouldn't worry anyway. Dennis was waiting in his car at the end of the block, just as he had promised. His thick silver hair seemed to glow in the early morning light, and his smile was warm and welcoming. "Oh, Artie," he sighed, pulling me into a rough embrace after I had settled into the passenger seat. "I should have checked on you sooner." "You're here now," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "That's what matters." As we drove away, I made a conscious decision not to look back at the house where my son lived. I couldn't bear the sight of the garage that had been my prison for the past month. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, each mile putting more distance between my past and my future, bringing me closer to something I hadn't felt in a very long time: possibility. Dennis lived in Oak Ridge, a modest but well-kept retirement community about 40 minutes outside the city. His apartment was small, but it was bright and airy, with large windows that overlooked a beautifully manicured courtyard garden. "It's not much," he apologized, showing me to his spare room, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." The room was tiny, barely large enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, but it had something the garage never did: warmth. A handmade quilt was folded neatly on the bed, and a small vase of fresh flowers sat on the windowsill. Dennis had prepared for my arrival with genuine care. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Dennis waved my gratitude away. "Remember when Helen first got sick? You still found the time to sit with me every day after my Sarah died. Some debts don't need repayment, Artie. They just need to be passed forward." That afternoon, as we sat sharing a pot of coffee in Dennis's sunlit kitchen, my phone began to ring. It was Charles. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. Michelle this time. Then Danielle. One after another, my children had suddenly decided they wanted to talk to me. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Dennis asked. I set my phone face down on the table. "Not yet. They'll leave messages," I thought. And they did. Charles was first, his voice tight with annoyance. "Dad, this is childish. Where are you? Call me back immediately." Michelle was next, attempting a tone of concern but landing squarely on condescension. "Dad, we're worried about you. This kind of behavior isn't helping your case for living independently." Finally, there was Danielle, her message the shortest and most telling. "Dad, just come back. You're making things complicated." Not a single one of them said, "I love you." Not one asked if I was safe or scared or if I needed anything. Their concern was entirely for themselves, for the inconvenience my sudden absence had caused them. I deleted the messages without a second thought. The days at Dennis's apartment passed with a gentle, healing rhythm. I spent my mornings reading in the garden, my afternoons exploring the community center where residents gathered for book clubs, card games, and art classes. In the evenings, we would cook simple meals together, sharing stories and memories from our long lives. 1 week stretched into 2. My children's calls became less frequent, their messages more irritated than concerned. I still wasn't ready to speak with them. "You'll have to talk to them eventually," Dennis said one evening as we folded laundry together. "Not for their sake, but for yours." "I know," I admitted. "But not until I figure out what comes next. I can't stay with you forever." Dennis stopped folding, his hands resting on a towel. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. Martin in 3B is moving to Florida next month to be closer to his daughter. His apartment is going to be available." My pulse quickened. I couldn't possibly afford it. My pension is supplemented by Social Security, but... "Yes," Dennis smiled. "Several residents here live on fixed incomes. There's a sliding scale for the rent based on income." Hope, that fragile bird I thought had died in that cold garage, began to flutter in my chest. "You think I could qualify?" "I know you could. And there's something else." Dennis hesitated for a moment. "You mentioned you used to do tailoring work." "Yes, a long time ago. Did you know we have a little workshop in the community center? For alterations, mending, custom work. The man who used to run it moved to the assisted living wing last year. No one's taken it over since." I stared at him, a flood of memories rushing back. The careful, precise stitches I'd made on wedding dresses. The curtains and slipcovers I had crafted to supplement our income during Helen's long illness. "I haven't sewn in years," I whispered. "But you could again," Dennis said gently. "Your hands remember, even if you think they've forgotten." That night, I dreamed of fabrics, silk and cotton and wool sliding through my fingers, being transformed under my touch. I woke up with a sense of purpose for the first time since Helen had passed away. The next morning, Dennis took me to meet Everett, the community manager. He was a no-nonsense man in his 60s who listened attentively as I explained my situation. "We have many residents here who have been abandoned by their children," he said matter-of-factly. "It's the great shame of this generation." He showed me the vacant apartment. It was small but perfect, with a large bay window that caught the morning light. Then he took me to the sewing room in the community center. It was dusty from disuse, but it was equipped with two sturdy, serviceable machines. "We need someone," he said simply. "The residents miss having alterations done right here in-house. Many of them can't drive to the mall anymore." My heart raced as I ran my fingers over the cool metal of the sewing machine. Could I really do this? Start my life over at 65? "I'd need supplies," I said cautiously. "Thread, scissors, a measuring tape." "We have a small budget for that," Everett replied, "and a waiting list of people needing alterations. You could start tomorrow if you wanted." As we walked back to Dennis's apartment, my mind was whirling with possibilities, a place of my own, work that mattered, a community of people who valued what I could contribute. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't see the familiar car parked outside Dennis's building. My stomach dropped as I recognized it, Charles's sleek, silver BMW. He stepped out of the car as he saw us approaching, his face set in that tight, professional smile he used with difficult patience. "Father," he said coolly, "you've led us on quite a chase." Dennis squeezed my arm reassuringly before slipping inside, giving us a moment of privacy. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "Phone GPS?" Charles replied, without a hint of shame. "I'm listed as your emergency contact, remember? I can track your location." Of course, the flagrant invasion of my privacy shouldn't have surprised me. "It's time to come home," he continued. "This little adventure of yours has gone on long enough." I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and I saw not the child I had raised, but a stranger who viewed me as a piece of property to be managed, not a person to be respected. "No," I said simply. Charles blinked, thrown off his script. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not coming back to your garage. I'm not going to a facility. I'm staying here." His expression hardened. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't afford to live on your own." I smiled, a calm certainty spreading through my entire body like a warm wave. "Watch me." 1 year. That's how long it had been since I walked out of Charles's garage with nothing but a single suitcase and a flicker of renewed determination. I stood in my own small apartment, the morning light streaming through the bay window, illuminating the new life I had built for myself. It was a life I had sewn together, stitch by careful stitch, just as I now did for the residents of Oak Ridge. The sewing room at the community center had become my sanctuary. What had started as simple alterations, hemming pants, taking in waistbands, had evolved into something far more meaningful. I began creating custom clothing for elderly bodies that the mainstream fashion industry completely ignored. I designed dresses with hidden adaptive features for women with arthritis, and trousers with dignified, easy-to-use closures for those with limited dexterity. Word of my work spread beyond our community. Orders started coming in from neighboring retirement homes, from families with elderly relatives, and from people who appreciated quality craftsmanship over mass-produced clothing. My hands, which had once been idle and empty in that cold concrete garage, now created daily acts of dignity and comfort. A knock at my open door interrupted my reflections. Dennis stood there, looking dapper in the new blazer I'd made for his birthday. "Ready for our Sunday brunch?" he asked, sweeping into my apartment. "They're expecting us." They were our circle of friends, a group of 6 men who had become my chosen family. Men who, in their own ways, had also been discarded by society, by their families, by a world that values youth over wisdom. Together, we had formed bonds that were stronger than blood. As we walked to the community dining room, residents called out greetings. "Arthur, the blouse fits perfectly." "Arthur, can you take in my jacket next week?" Each acknowledgement was a warm reminder that here, in this place, I mattered. The dining room buzzed with conversation. Our regular table by the window was already half full with our friends. Roger, a retired librarian, Matthew, who had been a civil rights attorney, and Peter, who had raised 5 children on his own after his wife died young. These were men with stories, with wisdom, with lives that continued to unfold in rich and meaningful ways. "There he is," Peter called out as we approached. "The miracle worker who made me look 10 pounds lighter in my grandson's wedding photos." Laughter rippled around the table as I took my seat. These Sunday brunches had become a sacred ritual for us, a time to share our triumphs and struggles, to remind each other that we were not invisible. "Did you hear back from the hospital?" Matthew asked as he passed me the coffee carafe. I nodded, still hardly believing it myself. "They want 24 adaptive gowns for the geriatric ward. Designed for dignity," they said. A small cheer went up from our table, drawing smiles from nearby diners. "From the garage to an entrepreneur in 1 year," Dennis said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "To Arthur, who taught us all that it's never too late to begin again." As their cups clinked against mine, I felt a fullness in my chest that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with a profound sense of belonging. After brunch, Dennis and I took a stroll through the community garden, enjoying the late spring blooms. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a rare occurrence these days. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in months. Emily, my granddaughter. With trembling fingers, I answered the call. "Hello? Grandpa?" Her voice sounded smaller and younger than her 14 years. "It's me, Emily." "I know, sweetheart. How are you?" "I'm okay." There was a pause. "Dad doesn't know I'm calling you." "Of course not." Charles had made his position perfectly clear during our last conversation 6 months ago. If I wouldn't return to his supervision, then I was no longer a part of the family. "Are you all right?" I asked, a note of concern sharpening my voice. "Yeah, I miss you. And I wanted to tell you something. I got an A on my sewing project in my home ec class." My heart swelled. Before I had left, I had taught Emily some basic stitches during secret visits to the garage. Charles had discouraged it, claiming that sewing was an obsolete skill and that Emily should be focusing on coding. "That's wonderful. What did you make?" "A skirt. It's not very good. Not like the things you could make. But my teacher said I have a natural eye for it." "I'm sure it's beautiful," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Another pause. "Dad still talks about you sometimes when he thinks we're not listening. I think he misses you, even if he won't admit it." I doubted that very much. But I wasn't going to burden Emily with the complexities of adult relationships. "Perhaps, could I come see you sometime? I've saved up my allowance. I could take the bus." Dennis squeezed my arm supportively, though he could only hear my side of the conversation. "I would love that, Emily, but we should probably talk to your father first. He'll just say no," Emily replied, the defeat evident in her voice. "Then we'll wait until he's ready." I said gently, "I'm not going anywhere." After we hung up, I sat down heavily on a garden bench, my emotions swirling. "Your granddaughter?" Dennis asked. I nodded. "She wants to visit. She's learning to sew." Dennis smiled. The thread continues. The following Saturday, as I was measuring a length of fabric for a new project, there was a commotion at the entrance of the community center. I looked up to see Charles standing in the doorway, with Emily half hidden behind him. My heart stopped for a moment, then began to race. Charles looked thinner, and the shadows under his eyes were more pronounced than I remembered. "Dad?" he said, his voice oddly uncertain. I set down my scissors carefully. "Charles, this is a surprise." He looked around the sewing room, taking in the orderly workspace, the various projects in different stages of completion, the bulletin board covered with thank you notes from satisfied clients. "Emily told me about her phone call," he said. "I was angry at first. Then I realized it's been a year, a whole year without my father. A year that I had not only survived, but thrived in, without my children." "You look well," he continued, a question lingering in his voice. "I am well," I replied simply. Emily edged out from behind her father, her eyes bright with excitement. "Is this where you work, Grandpa? It's amazing." I smiled at my granddaughter's genuine enthusiasm. "Would you like to see what I'm making?" As Emily eagerly joined me at the cutting table, Charles remained by the door, his posture stiff and uncertain. He was used to being in control of his environment, his operating room, his immaculate home, his relationships. This new dynamic had left him unbalanced. After showing Emily a few techniques, I looked up and found Charles examining one of my adaptive dresses displayed on a mannequin. "This is remarkable," he said, running his fingers over the hidden magnetic closures. "You designed this?" I nodded. "For people with dexterity issues. It looks like a regular dress, but it's easier for them to put on independently." Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, of the skilled and resourceful man who had raised him, not the helpless burden he had relegated to his garage. "Emily says you're selling these to hospitals now?" "Yes, and taking private commissions. I'm actually quite busy these days." Charles's gaze swept around the room again, then came back to rest on me. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the rapid reassessment of his father. "We should talk, Dad," he said finally. "About everything. Maybe we could get dinner sometime?" A year ago, I would have leapt at this olive branch, desperate for any crumb of connection to my children. But I was no longer that man. "I have dinner with my friends on Wednesdays and Sundays," I said calmly. "But I could do lunch next Thursday." Charles blinked, clearly expecting immediate acquiescence. Yes, Thursday works." As they prepared to leave, Emily hugged me tightly. "Can I come back soon? I want to learn how to make a dress like that one." "Of course, sweetheart. Anytime." Charles hesitated at the door. "Dad, He stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. I waited, neither helping him nor hindering him. "You've built something good here," he finally managed to say. I didn't know you could." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a complete acknowledgement of the deep harm he had caused. But it was a start. It was a recognition that I existed beyond the roles of father, dependent, and burden. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Charles," I said softly. "But perhaps it's not too late for you to learn." After they left, Dennis found me sitting quietly at my workstation, a whirlwind of emotions too complex to name swirling within me. "How was it?" he asked. I considered his question carefully. "It was a beginning," I said. "Not a return to what was, but a beginning of what might be." That evening, I stood at my bay window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The same sun that had set on my old life now rose on my new one. Charles might come back into my life, or he might not. Michelle and Danielle might follow his lead, or they might remain distant. But their presence or absence in my life no longer defined me. I was Arthur Anderson. I had survived being discarded. I had rebuilt my life from scraps, much like the beautiful quilts I now created from pieces of fabric that others might have thrown away. The future stretched out before me, an uncut length of cloth, full of endless possibility. And my hands, these capable, weathered hands, were ready to shape it into something beautiful, one stitch at a time. If you like this story, Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching,